Shall we begin?
Why not? Welcome to Frankie Sense and More. It's like she's got a whole lot of goodness for you with a little bit of sass.
Frankie, did you just say...
She sure did. Not to mention, along with...
Whoops.
Join us now as Frankie Picasso and her new co-host mix it up with authors, musicians, and interviews with world-changing people.
Let's begin now.
Okay, let's begin now, because it only makes sense.
And hello there, and welcome to Frankie Sense and More. Today I have a very different but a very special show for you. And while it's not, the usual Frankie Sense, I think that you will find it extremely entertaining. There was a time in America that everybody knew the name Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy was a union activist from a young age, and he played a major role in the growth and development of the unions, especially, making his way up to general president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters between 1958 and 1971. In 1975, Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. He vanished and was eventually declared dead in 1982. And since then, and this is why many people may remember his name today, he has been at the center of many a conspiracy theory, and those theories were laid to rest by author Charles Brandt, whose book, I Heard You Paint Houses, includes the deathbed confession of Hoffa's killer and close friend, Frank the Irishman Sheeran. Well, with me today is Charles Brandt. He is a former junior high school English teacher, welfare investigator, homicide prosecutor, and chief deputy attorney general of the state of Delaware. And he was in private practice since 1976. Charles has been elected president of the Delaware Trial Lawyers Association, a Delaware chapter of the American Board of Trial Advocates, and he has been named by his peers as one of the best lawyers in America and one of the best lawyers in Delaware. He is a frequent speaker on cross-examination and interrogation techniques for reluctant witnesses, and Charles is also the author, as I already mentioned. I didn't say this. He's also the author of The Right to Remain Silent, a book that he wrote based on the major crimes that he solved through interrogation. And he lives in Iowa today, or Idaho, with his wife Nancy and his three grown children. Idaho and Iowa, potatoes. Has three grown children. I'm sorry about that, Charles. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. What fun.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I hate to say this, you wrote a killer book, and no pun intended. It is a wonderful book. And I have to ask, the question that everybody's asking, why you? How did you come to meet Frank Sheeran, and why did he tell you the story?
Well, I have to tell you, there are lawyers colleagues of mine in Delaware that call it divine providence, that he should land in my lap, because I taught cross-examination to other lawyers, and I taught interrogation to other cops. And the older book that you mentioned that came out in 1988, The Right to Remain Silent, was a book about homicides that I solved through interrogation of suspects and the obtaining of confessions. Well, what happened was that by the time our paths crossed, he was in prison. He had been convicted of labor racketeering and given 32 years in jail. The reason they gave him 32 years in jail is that he was the number one suspect in Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance.
Charlie, didn't he get two terms of 32 years? Or is that a different?
Well, it's a total of 32. He got an 18 and a 14.
Oh, okay.
Equally, two different trials. Good for you. I got to watch my step with you. But he did get 32. He got them back to back. They were consecutive terms, so they didn't meld into one another as a concurrent term would. So they were 18 and 14 makes 32, and he was serving 32 years in prison. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I had elevated my law practice to medical malpractice, suing doctors and hospitals and who commit grievous injury through their carelessness to their patients. And I got a call from a representative of the Philadelphia Mafia, a guy by the name of Franny McDonald, and he wanted to hire me to get Frank the Irishman Sheeran out of prison on medical grounds. He was then 70 years old, and he had severe spinal stenosis, and since I did medical work, would I get him out? Well, it was easy. The prison really didn't want to have to take care of a guy that, as sick as he was, who needed surgery and then needed aftercare. And when I got him out, he took my staff and me to a lunch at an Italian mafia hangout, and it was Frank and then 8 guys named Rocco sitting around a table, and they were all talking about how amazing it was that they were all still alive, and they were bad-mouthing the FBI. You know, we were like in a foreign land. And,
okay, but that wasn't the first time you met him.
No, it wasn't.
That's so bad.
It was the first time I had
been hired by him.
I met him after he got out of jail, but after I got him out of jail. But you want the story of when I got him out of jail?
Yeah, because that made a big impression. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why he respected you and wanted to tell you the story.
That was my style in those days. But so after Franny McDonald hired me to get him out on medical grounds, we needed him to sign papers, and I had a younger partner at the time named Bart Dalton, whose father was from Newfoundland. Anyway, Bart went down to the jail about 50 miles south of Wilmington, Delaware, and asked him to sign the papers, and Frank refused. He had a different idea. He wanted us to sue the governor, the federal judge, the state court judge, the FBI, the state police. He just wanted us to sue everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, the FBI was visiting him monthly, trying to get him to admit to whatever he knew about Hoffa's disappearance. And this was around 1991. It was 1991, actually, and it was 16 years after Hoffa's disappearance. They were still putting pressure on the Irishman. He had been written up in 6 books about the disappearance as participating in it. He'd been profiled by the New York Times, profiled by Newsweek magazine. And so when I went down there, I knew all that about him. I knew that he was a hitman, and he was a suspect in Hoffa's, by then, murder, no longer disappearance. And he wouldn't sign. My young partner came back, and I sent him back again and said, now listen, be sure he understands that if we go around suing all these people, he'll never get out of jail. He'll bring attention to himself. Mm-hmm. And the FBI will see to it that we then will lose the what looks like a real easy case to get him out on medical grounds. So my partner went back, same story. Frank wouldn't go for it. So I said, well, let's double team him. And we went down there. And when I was a junior high school teacher, I knew this was before drugs. This was 1963. Mm-hmm. The tougher kids were, were not what they became later under the influence of drugs. But you could talk to them as long as you did it when they were misbehaving in a non-threatening, sing-songy kind of way. Mm-hmm. And I was taught that by the vice principal of the school. Well, I was using the same technique on Frank in a non-threatening, sing-songy way. Frank was wheeled in a wheelchair to the meeting, and he was wheeled in by a former very satisfied client of mine, the former president of the Delaware chapter of the Pagans Motorcycle Club, who had been accused of killing 2 witnesses and leaving them in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. Well, he didn't do it. Another pagan had done it, but I got him off. He was now in jail on drug charges, and he wheeled Frank Sheeran into the meeting room, and then he just this big pagan. I'm 5'8", I'm a little short Italian guy. This big pagan throws his arms around me, and I thought, well, that's a good sign. Now I talk to Frank in a sing-songy way. He sees that Dale respects me, and Frank just looked at me like I was dirt. Sat in his wheelchair, glared at me as I was talking. When I was finished, he didn't acknowledge anything I said, and he just began rattling off who he wanted to sue. I want to sue the Judge Latcham in the federal court. I want to sue Judge Taylor in the state court. And he just went on and on and on. And one thing I knew from my experience in law enforcement when I was a homicide investigator, when a patrol car gets word of 2 guys fighting outside the Walnut Street Lounge or some other bar, they don't jump on that. They don't They don't make a beeline in their patrol cars for that. They give those fighters a chance to wear themselves out before they get there. So I let them wear themselves out. Let them talk, let them talk, let them talk. And finally, he seemed to be done. And I said, "Are you done, Frank?" And he said, "Yes, I'm done." I said, "Well, I just wish you could hear yourself talk, because then you'd know you weren't making any sense at all. We're going to file for early parole based on your medical condition. That's what we do. We know how to do it. My partner's going to return in a week, and you better have signed those papers, or you better get yourself another lawyer. And I doubt that you're going to get one who will file these crazy lawsuits that you have in mind. Guard, we're out of here." So we left. My partner goes down a week later to pick up the papers. He comes back to the office, and Bart's a big guy, 6'3", athletic. He comes back to the office, pale as a ghost. He said, "Charlie, I've never heard anybody talk that way about another person. Frank wouldn't stop talking about anything but you. Nobody's ever talked to him that way and gotten away with it." And I felt like I was squaring a mafia beef rather than practicing law. I said, well, did he sign the papers? And Bart said, "Yes, he did." I said, "Okay, then I guess this one counts. Let's win this." And I knew we were going to win it. It was not a problem.
Yeah.
But I had also had I don't know if you read, this is in the book. He had tried to hire me. Did I ever tell you that one where he had tried to hire me in the federal trial?
Yes.
And then he, I went to federal court with him. This was the 18-year sentence that he ultimately got.
We're about to go to a commercial break, Charlie. I think how many seconds do we have here, Ben? And I want you to tell the story. Okay, we got 30 seconds. Let's tell that story when we come back from our break. I want to tell that story. I want to talk about, oh my gosh, there's so much to talk about. The colorful language, the gangster lingo.
Oh my God, yeah.
It's so much fun. And really, how he debilitated between the years that when you first met him and later on, and the reason for that. So when we come back, we're going to be talking to Charlie Brandt. He's the author of I Hear You Paint Houses, and we'll talk about the title too and what that means. And it was the first words that Jimmy Hoffa ever said to Frank Sheeran. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We're coming right back.
Heck no. We're just getting warmed up. Frankie Sense and More will be right back after we pay the bills.
It's words you never heard.
Here's some fun facts about noses and ears I'll bet you didn't know. Did you know your ears secrete more earwax when you're afraid than when you aren't? And generally, people with asthma have better hearing than those who don't. Now, here's a word for you. When someone gets their ears pierced, they're actually piercing their pinna. The pinna is the fleshy part of the earlobe. Did you know it's possible to sneeze so hard you can break a rib? That happened to my husband's secretary once. And according to research, you'll blow your nose 250 times this year. Scientists have also determined that the smell in your right nostril is more pleasant, while the smell in your left nostril is more accurate. By the way, twice as many men as women can wiggle their ears.
It's words you never heard.
I'm Carolyn Davidson, and you can have fun challenging your words you never heard vocabulary with my free app, Too Funny for Words.
It's the Fitness Minute with fitness expert Annette Hammond.
Should you invest in home exercise equipment? My answer is yes. I am a big advocate of purchasing good exercise equipment and exercising at home. Working out at a club, rec center, or studio is fabulous also, but I find that people who have exercise equipment at home tend to exercise on a more regular basis. I design home workout gyms for clients, so I'm always keeping up to date with new equipment. But I want you to know that if you don't have the budget to buy a new state-of-the-art piece, you can still purchase used equipment at a great price and get an awesome workout. Garage sales, want ads, and consignment stores are terrific places to pick up used equipment. Some pieces are outdated and not safe to use, but there are others that are wonderful and are great values. Look for good treadmills, stationary bikes, elliptical trainers, and free weights. For the Fitness Minute, I'm Annette Hammond.
Yeah, and you're listening to Frankie Sense and More, and I am your host, Frankie Picasso, and my guest today is Charles Brandt, and he is the author of I Heard You Paint Houses. So just before we went to break, Charlie, you were going to tell us about the federal trial that you took, that you did with Frank Sheeran, Frank the Irishman Sheeran.
Yes, well, Frank the Irishman Sheeran, who will be played in the movie by Bob De Niro,
which is great.
In the movie version, which you probably wanted to talk about at some point. But
I do. But I have to say, as a character, Frank Sheeran was like 6'4" in his heyday before he shrunk, and I laughed when it was like Robert De Niro. I'm like, how are they going to make him look so tall? But it's Hollywood, right?
Well, my cousin Carmine, who was a producer of a number of films, including Bruce Willis's Die Hard with a Vengeance, he told me that they will create a desk to scale so that he's sitting behind a desk and he looks so much larger than he is because the desk is proportionately smaller.
Right.
And they do that with the whole room. And then they surround him with the other actors. Al Pacino, who's going to play Jimmy Hoffa. He's very short. Joe Pesci, who's going to play the mob boss, Russel Bufalino.
Oh, is he?
Behind.
Wow.
He's very short. So De Niro will then appear larger. And I have to tell you, I had a meeting with him, as you know from the book, with De Niro, Scorsese, and the screenwriter Steve Zalian, who won the Oscar for Schindler's List. I had a 4-hour meeting with them, and De Niro is listed as, I think, 5'10" or something like that. And he looks bigger. And he's kind of a buffed guy. He just looks bigger, carries himself well, has good posture. So
he seems like a really nice man.
Oh God, were they something? And very, very intuitive. The meeting was supposed to last an hour. It lasted 4 hours in a hotel in Manhattan.
I like how you said they didn't serve dinner.
No, they didn't. They only expected it to be an hour, so they had Pepperidge Farm cookies and. Yeah. And I had flown in from
we got to go
Idaho,
back to the federal trial for a minute, then we'll come back to the movie. How's that? We promised.
All right,
we have to go back.
This was about 10 years before I got him out. I got him out in 91, so this was around 1981. And he was pending trial, and he came to my office and wanted me to represent him in this labor racketeering trial in federal court. So I quoted him a fee. And part of it was up front, part of it was as we went along. And I went to court with him. And it was what they call in our system, I don't know about Canada, an arraignment, where you enter your plea of guilty or not guilty. Bail is set, and certain scheduling events are set. But it's in a formal setting in a courtroom. And the federal judge is sitting up there in his robe. And I'm sitting there with Frank. And they've got these well-heeled, well-dressed Philadelphia lawyers sitting there with the rest of the defendants. Bobby Rispo of the Philly mob, Eugene Hoffa, more closely associated with Tony Provenzano of the New Jersey mob, Eugene Hoffa's son, then a guy, I don't know his first name, named Cohen. And these guys were the brains behind the scheme to allow certain trucking companies like Coca-Cola or companies that had trucks like Coca-Cola to not have to pay union wage. And Frank was accused of doing this.
Wow.
So I sat there with these people, and their lawyers had the gold cufflinks and monograms on their starched cuffs. I used to see monograms on shirts, pockets maybe, in the breast, but these were on their cuffs, some kind of style up there. So we went through the arraignment. Then we're in the hallway waiting for Frank to go in and sign his bail. And he said to me, and he stammered, so I'm going to imitate him. Don't get me wrong. I like the way you handle yourself and all. But that upfront part, and I got no problem with the fee, but that upfront part, that's for motions and paperwork and stuff. Just let those other lawyers in there file the paperwork, prepare the paperwork, and you just sign it. So you really don't need to do anything for that upfront money. So I don't want to pay that, and I never negotiate with a client. So
yeah,
I said, Frank, you're gonna have to get yourself another lawyer. You agreed to the fee in my office, that's the fee. I do my own work. I don't know whose side any of those lawyers are really on. I don't know whose side any of your co-defendants are really on. But I'll be on your side when I prepare paperwork. I did an about-face and walked out. I didn't even give him a chance to answer me. So that 10 years later, when he came back to me, he knew, he remembered that time he was left at the altar. Well, about a month later, maybe two weeks to a month later, it turned out that the Philly mob guy, Bobby Rispo, was a cooperating witness. He was wired. He was wired the whole time they were in court. He was wired when they had a lawyer and client meetings, and I proved my point to Frank. I don't trust any of those people in there. I do my own work. So I was a little bit happy when he called me, or when Franny McDonald called me on his behalf to come back down to the prison and represent him on the early parole. But and here's the thing, why it's relevant. All of this is relevant to me is that I learned early on that, and believe me, I learned early on that people have an innate desire to confess. Now, their toes might not agree with that idea because their feet are going to go to prison with them. But their soul and their conscience, you can get to them.
I think it's a really good place to stop for 1 second and go back and find out who Frank Sheeran was and how he became, such an important figure, and especially in the mafia and in the Detroit and Philadelphia and that whole mob scene in New York, because he is an interesting character and he kind of fell into it in a way, and he wasn't Italian, but he was almost adopted by Russel Bufalino. So why don't you take us back to the early Frank? You bet.
Thank you for that. It is time we got to know him.
Yeah.
You bet. Frank was raised a strict Catholic outside of Philadelphia, kind of huckleberry thin life that he had. His father spent 5 years studying for the priesthood, and Frank's mother went to Mass every single morning. I was also a Catholic and was able to use that in my talks with Frank to solicit these serial confessions over a 5-year period. But he went off to war. He enlisted before the war started, before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and he spent the entire war in the infantry in a division that General Patton christened my killer division. He instructed them that they were not to take prisoners. And Frank had really never done anything wrong in his life other than just, kid stuff. And here he was in combat in World War II. He served 411 combat days when the average was 80. He was in the beginning of the war to the end of the war. At 200 combat days, you were eligible for a discharge, but he didn't take it. And he was taught by the officers of the killer division, when I tell you to take a prisoner back behind the lines for interrogation, you do that. You take him for interrogation. When I add hurry back, that means you take him just a short distance and kill him. And so here was Frank in training to be a hitman in the United States Army at that time.
Courtesy of the United States Army.
Courtesy of the United States Army. And or courtesy of Adolf Hitler, however you want to look at it.
Or Patton, he's at Patton with a tough SOB. So Charlie comes back. He comes back to society, and we know what that's like. We see our veterans today, and from all the wars, they don't always come back the same. And obviously, after 411 days of being a killer, you wouldn't come back quite the same.
Correct. And this book is a biography of Frank Sheeran. The Hoffa stuff is maybe 4 chapters, of a book about this man, a complicated man, and a man that is very well understood by De Niro in my meeting with him. They didn't view him as just a simple thug or a caricature of a mafia person. He
really had a code, an ethics, code of ethics, kind of,
And he had he had remorse for what he was forced to do to Hoffa. Anyway, he came back and he kind of floundered around for another 10 years working as a truck driver for a supermarket chain. He got married. He had 3 daughters, and he hung around the Catholic parish. He played football for Shanahan's Irish football team. And one day he was at a truck stop in Elmira, New York. His rig had broken down, and an older Italian man came over to him and said, I can get that fixed for you and get you started. Well, it was Russel Bufalino, who was then the most powerful mafia boss in America. He was a certified mechanic, by the way. he owned
Frank spoke some Italian because he spent time in Italy.
Frank, at part of his youth, he spent growing up in an Italian neighborhood, and he spoke some Italian. And then with the invasion of Sicily, and he was in also the invasion of Salerno, 3 amphibious invasions, and the invasion of Anzio. And he spoke some pretty good Italian from those days as well. And he had been in Russel Bufalino's hometown in Sicily. So Russell began to groom this guy. He sensed that he was in the presence of a powerful man. I think both of them did, but Russell especially knew. If you were in Frank's company, you knew this was a very powerful man. He was physically intimidating, but also I don't even want to say there was a menace about him, because even when he had the twinkle in his eye and he was telling an Irish joke, you just knew he had charisma. And
he was a
Russell,
dance instructor. I mean,
oh my God, yeah, he was came in second.
Yeah, hitman dance instructor. He liked to dance.
Yeah, they had every year the New York Daily News put on a dance show, and he came in second in the Foxtrot, he and his partner. And he taught his daughters how to dance, and he was a dance instructor while working as a truck driver. He was also a bouncer in nightclubs while working as a truck driver.
We're going to go to another commercial break in a few seconds, but when we come back, there's so much to tell about Frank. He's such an interesting man and an interesting character. And as I alluded to before, we're going to talk about, the deathbed confession, if you want to call it that, and all of the interesting characters you won't believe were in this book. Don't go away. We're coming right back.
Thank you.
Heck no. We're just getting warmed up. Frankie Sense and More will be right back after we pay the bills.
It's the Fitness Minute with fitness expert Annette Hammond.
The Mediterranean diet incorporates the basics of healthy eating, similar to the traditional cooking style of countries bordering the Mediterranean Sea. The Mayo Clinic reports that an analysis of more than 1.5 million healthy adults showed that following the Mediterranean diet was associated with a reduced incidence of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's diseases and a reduced risk of death from heart disease and cancer. The Wall Street Journal cited a study published by the Journal of the American Medical Association that shows that the Mediterranean diet can counteract the effects of aging on the brain's ability to function. The diet emphasizes fruit and vegetables, unrefined grains and beans, and includes fish and minimal consumption of meat and full-fat dairy products. Nuts and olive oil play a big part also. Boost your brain by eating the Mediterranean way. I'm Annette Hammond.
If you're ready for a big change in your work, your career, your happiness, your life, it's time for the $1 Million Mindset with Marla Tabaka. Monday afternoons at 2, 1 Central on TogiNet.com. Marla believes that with the right mindset, anything is possible. Join us as successful life coach Marla Tabaka inspires you and her clients to explore, discover, and live your dreams by developing what she calls the $1 Million Mindset. Marla will inspire you to take action on your dreams and reveal secrets to success that will help you realize your own unique power. Tune into the $1 Million Mindset for heartwarming stories with Marla Tabaka. Learn tips and tricks to building a successful business and unlock the secrets to creating a happier, more balanced life through abundant thinking and attraction power. For more information on the $1 Million Mindset, go to our website, marlatabaka.com. That's MarlaTabaka.com. It's the $1 Million Mindset with Marla Tabaka. Monday afternoons at 2, 1 p.m. Central on TogiNet.com.
And we're back. It's Frankie Sense and More. I am your host, Frankie Picasso. My guest today is Charlie Brandt, and he is the author of I Heard You Paint Houses. He's also one of the best interrogation and cross-examination lawyers in the country. So here we are, back with Charlie. We started to talk about Frank Sheeran's life, how he set up to become really a hitman, and how he got involved, his first meeting with Russel Bufalino, into the Italian mob. And let's go from there. Where should we take him? He got married. He had 3 daughters to marry, and he taught dancing, like you said, to his daughters. And then he kind of started not to. He loved Mary very much, but life kind of took him in a different direction. And he kind of left her, but he came home and brought her money every now and then.
Regularly. He was a faithful man in a way, but the more he got into his what he called his downtown way of life, especially after he killed his first man, and he saw that there was no way out, he was in, and Russell had lured him in. He just stopped going home regularly, and then he just stopped going home altogether. His wife was a devout Irish Catholic and a really good woman, and all his daughters turned out to be really good adults, successful in their own ways, even though they grew up with a lot of newspaper articles about their father suspected of killing this guy or suspected of killing that guy. And he was a complicated man. Complex man.
So okay, so some of the lingo, fresh kid. What's a fresh kid?
Well, let me build that up a little bit. There's an older edition. The new edition just came out on the 12th of July. If a reader wants to order it through Amazon, you have to make sure that you're ordering the book with the yellow burst on it, like a little sunburst that says directed by Martin Scorsese. Amazon has a glitch right now in their system, and it won't be fixed for a day or two. So the old edition pops up without that, but that burst signifies the new edition. And in the new edition, there is a new photograph, and it wasn't in the old one, and it's a photograph of Frank and me at the head of a table full of beer bottles at a retirement benefit for a fellow Teamster. And I would pick odd moments to ask Sheeran questions that are part of interrogation technique. So someone took a picture at the precise moment that I asked Frank Sheeran, why is it that Bufalino had such faith in you and that he gave you such accolades? Frank was higher up, even though not an Italian. He was the third highest ranking official in Bufalino's entire mafia family. And Frank said, well, if I tell you that, I'd have to tell you something else. I said, Frank, don't hold out on me. Come on, what are you talking about? He said, you ever heard of Joey Gallo? I said, sure, Crazy Joey Gallo. He was whacked in Umberto's Clam House. Frank said, a fresh kid. Right away, I knew he had something to confess about Crazy Joey Gallo. And there's a look on, you can see me in the photograph leaning in toward him with my tape recorder under the table, or, on his lap, practically. And he has a little bit of a bewildered look on his face, which he got whenever he confessed something new to me. And then he would begin to feel better once he got it off his chest. But the initial confession, he had that certain look that's in the book. So that's where the fresh kid comes from.
Well, his confession, I mean, he had a code. You don't rat. You're not a rat. You don't rat out. You don't tell anything about anybody. No. And because you're going to get whacked. When in doubt,
when in doubt, have no doubt. If they, I'll tell you a story about that. If they
get a trip to Australia.
If they don't trust you, you're dead. When in doubt, have no doubt.
Yeah.
And when Frank was out, and I got him out, and Russell had died, and I was posing as Frank's biographer who was going to prove that he had nothing to do with the Hoffa disappearance, even though 6 other books claimed he was involved, and the FBI claimed he was involved in a famous report that the FBI did just a couple of 3 months after Hoffa's disappearance. The FBI, under Bob Garrity, had solved the case. They just didn't know what these various people had done. But through informants, they knew who was involved. And so, excuse me. Tell me where I was.
Yeah, well, he had just told you about killing Crazy Joe, and it was Crazy Joe's birthday, and there were so many reports that said there was 3 gunmen that went in, but really, he knew that it was just him, and there weren't anybody else, and I think it was the head investigator, the lead investigator, wrote to you and said, yeah, you know what, he did it.
Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah.
And that was very very telling and very interesting. So we talked about what the fresh kid and going to Australia meant you went down under, which 6 feet under.
Oh, I know what I was going to tell you. I was at the birthday party with Frank and Big Billy D'Elia, who was the new boss of the Bufalino crime family. And after Frank blew out the candles, we were in an Italian restaurant. We had lunch. I went back to my office. I was still practicing law at the time. And that night I got a call from Frank that, you know what that Billy said to me about you, Charlie, after you left? I said, no, Frank, what did he say? He said, do I trust that guy? I said to him, do I trust that guy? If it wasn't for that guy, I'd still be in jail for another 10 years. I said, wait a minute, Frank, back up here. What did the current boss of the Bufalino crime family say about me? Do I trust that guy? And he said, F him. I never liked that mother effer. And he never liked me. I said, Frank, is that supposed to make me feel better?
Yeah, exactly.
So Billy never trusted me, never liked me, and just as the book was coming out, he got word to me through 2 sources, roundabout word, that Billy is not happy with Charlie. My wife was concerned about it, and I said, well, the book isn't out yet. When he sees the book, this is the first edition. When he sees the book, he's going to see that his name is not mentioned once. Mm-hmm. But now, of course, in the new edition, with the yellow verse, Billy has become a cooperating witness, the first to the FBI, because of charges they had against him for conspiring to kill witnesses that were going to testify against him. And the first question they asked him when they came to his prison was what happened to Hoffa, and he told them to read my book. He had given it to one of his underlings with an inscription. Sometimes you can believe everything you read.
Wow.
The Crazy Joey Gallo hit was corroborated by an editor at the New York Times. She's the national assignment editor, and she happened to be at Umberto's Clam House, and she eyewitnessed Frank Sheeran, the lone gunman, come in and kill Gallo. She was on TV on public broadcasting in America on a TV show with it hit her face, but she positively identified Frank.
So when Russell asked Frank to put a hit on somebody, he would just say, "Bring your little brother," which meant bring your gun.
Yes, bring your little brother.
That was really cute. Now, here's the thing. I want to get through this because we don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to make sure people understand that Frank and Jimmy Hoffa, Frank loved Jimmy. They were very close. They were very close friends. And Frank was probably the only person that Jimmy might have trusted to even, go anywhere, get out of whatever where he was. So
that's correct.
This really, it played on Frank a lot. Like, Frank had to do it or else he'd be whacked himself. But at the same time, he had tried to talk sense into Jimmy, who was going off the deep end with all the stuff that had happened to him. I mean, he had been persecuted by Bobby Kennedy, and he had a whole committee just trying to pound him and put him in jail. Talk about that
Frank,
a little bit.
Yeah, you're right. Frank was a very devoted Hoffa man. Frank became very good at being a union official, and he believed that despite the fact that Hoffa helped himself at times to money, and also had people killed, Hoffa was driven to do his best for the working men and women of America. And Sheeran believed that, and so did the Mafia. They respected him for that part of Hoffa's personality. And Frank was quoted as saying, "I'll be a Hoffa man till they pat my face with a shovel and steal my cufflinks." And he meant it. Mm-hmm. And the mob, when they want to do a high-profile hit, they get somebody that's close to the victim, somebody that has access to the victim, and they spring it on you. And Frank said to me, if I said no to Russell, Jimmy would have been just as dead, and I'd have gone to Australia with him, meaning down under. Mm-hmm. And that feeling, those feelings that Frank had, at the moment he was told to do what he had to do, till the day he died, are what attracted Robert De Niro to this book, what caused them to contact me to get the rights. And now Scorsese will be directing it. As I mentioned earlier, Al Pacino will be in it, Joe Pesci, and Bob De Niro, and they expect to start filming in January of this coming year. And I know they're going to nail it. And I was just, when I met with them, I said, I know you guys understand this, man. And they said, no, we do. We truly do.
I thought it was interesting. I mean, ever since that day, I guess Frankie had his face in a bottle of wine. He drank and drank and drank because he needed to forget or lose himself from those memories. But Jimmy Hoffa did not allow alcohol around him or smoking. And so when the guys were in his company, they were straight shooters, except for Frank.
And Frank never cheated on Hoffa never cheated on his wife.
No.
Hoffa was a very moral man in an old-fashioned sense. He had morality, and Frank really respected the heck out of him.
Don't you think that the hardest part for him, and we're going to go break, but I think the hardest part besides having to kill a friend of yours, was that Frank knew that the family would always wonder what happened to him. Usually the usual way of doing it was doing it out publicly so the family could, put their loved one to rest, bury them. But Hoffa's family didn't know. They had no idea.
To make him disappear, and the hardest part for Frank, in his conscience, what bothered him the most, was that right after Jimmy disappeared, Frank called Hoffa's wife and offered whatever help he could be to try to find Jimmy and to do what he could to find Jimmy, all the while knowing that he had killed Jimmy. And that haunted him, that phone call. He said to me, what kind of man does that? Well, you do what you have to do.
Does that?
Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to another break, and we'll find out what kind of a man does that, because we have some more to tell about him when we come right back with Charlie Brandt. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you.
No,
thank you.
We're just getting warmed up. Frankie Sense and More will be right back after we pay the bills.
Close your eyes and imagine living your life without limits. Where would you go? Who would you meet? What would you do? During an Uncover Your Hidden Genius session, you will discover what's keeping you from living your life with purpose, passion, and fulfillment of your potential. You'll get a clear vision of the steps you need to take to uncover your hidden genius so that you can live a life without limits. Sessions can be done over the phone, Skype, or in person. Find out more at www.joycebufordempowers.com or by calling 903-287-0747.
It's the Fitness Minute with fitness expert Annette Hammond.
Spring and summer are great times to go green. Choosing to eat green vegetables and fruit on a daily basis is a fantastic idea. Whether it's asparagus, lettuce, spinach, or artichokes, green produce is a wonderful choice, full of essential nutrients. Green beans, broccoli, edamame, and avocados are delicious and very nutritious. Cucumbers, peas, and peppers contain lutein, which helps protect against cataracts and macular degeneration. Green fruits like grapes and kiwi not only taste delicious, they're full of antioxidants. Leafy greens are also excellent sources of folate, a B vitamin that helps reduce the risk of birth defects and helps keep our hearts healthy. So next time you're grocery shopping, choose fresh green vegetables and fruit and go green. For the Fitness Minute, I'm Annette Hammond.
And we're back. I'm speaking to Charlie Brandt. I am your host, Frankie Picasso. You're listening to Frankie Sense and More. And boy, what a great show we have for you today. I heard you paint houses. Those were the first words that Jimmy Hoffa said to Frank Sheeran. And why don't you tell us what that means, Charlie?
Well, to paint a house is to whack a guy. The paint is the blood that spatters on the walls and the floor. That's the title of the book. The movie has the working title of The Irishman, but De Niro was on the Charlie Rose show recently, and he said he wants to go back to the original title of the book for the movie, and I hope they do.
Yeah.
But,
when do they expect that to be out?
Well, probably early 2018. They're going to start filming in 2017, coming up in January. So it's probably one of those deals where they show it just before the year ends, so it's eligible for the Academy Awards.
Yeah, it's always better.
That next February.
So I want to go back to your book for a second because there's some very interesting people that show up. There's Senator Boggs, there's Joe Biden, there's we mentioned the Kennedys, there's Bobby and his brother, and the president and the president. It sounds like the president was killed in your book because of Bobby's relentless pursuit of the mafia. And I don't remember who said it, but it was something, I think in the book you said something like, if you want to kill a dog, you cut off the head. And
that was Carlos Marcello, the boss of the New Orleans boss, whose territory includes Dallas and Alabama and Mississippi and certain other places. But Marcello especially was highly motivated to want to get rid of Bobby Kennedy as the Attorney General. And he's quoted as saying that the Sicilians believe that you cut off a dog's head and the tail dies too, meaning that the head was President Kennedy and the tail was Bobby Kennedy. Now, there have been other books that have asserted that the mob killed Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy Jr. was on the Charlie Rose show about a year ago, and he said that his father always believed that the mafia killed his brother Jack, that his father, Bobby Kennedy, gave lip service to the Warren Commission report, but believed it to be a shoddy piece of craftsmanship, is the quote. As well, the federal government put together a House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1976, 13 years after Jack Kennedy was killed, and it was to study the Kennedy assassination and the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination. And the head of that committee, General Counsel, is currently a professor at Notre Dame, G. Robert Blakey. And Blakey has been on television a number of times saying that the mob killed Kennedy and got away with it. It's just that none of these people have any evidence. I have a confession, a confession from Frank Sheeran that although he didn't know what he was doing at the time, he was instructed to pick up a duffel bag with rifles from Monty's restaurant in Brooklyn. It was given to him by Tony Provenzano, who later became an arch enemy of Hoffa's, and was instrumental in Hoffa's death. But at this point, he gave Frank that bag. Frank drove it as instructed to an airstrip outside of Baltimore, where another member of the Genovese family, Provenzano was Genovese, another member of the Genovese family picked up the rifles. Now, that was 1963, before Kennedy's death. Frank said, I had no idea, and I don't have to tell you, there's nobody you could ask about something like that.
Right.
But then when Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald, Sheeran was convinced that the mob was involved, but again, he had no one he could ask. And then in 1974, Sheeran was privy to a discussion that led to an argument between Russel Bufalino and Jimmy Hoffa, where Bufalino said to Hoffa, there are those higher up than me that feel that you're not showing appreciation for Dallas. And that was picked up on further as Sheeran was getting ready to take Hoffa to the Warwick Hotel. Bufalino took Frank aside and said, tell your friend what it is. Well, those words, what it is, means tell your friend he's going to be killed. Tell your friend what it is. Frank, who loved Jimmy, said, Jimmy's pretty powerful himself, Russell. And Russell said, you're dreaming, my friend. if they could take out the president, they could take out the president of the Teamsters. Then when Frank got Hoffa home to the Warwick, Frank begged Hoffa to back down and do what Russell wanted him to do, which was stop pursuing his goal of recapturing the Teamsters Union that he lost when he went to jail. And Hoffa expounded further and told Frank, you know those rifles that you took to Baltimore? Well, they were for use in Dallas. And so Frank told me that. I put that in the book. The book came out in 2004. In 2008, pursuant to a new law, a new federal statute, they began releasing more material about the JFK assassination. They started releasing it, I think, in 1992. But in 2008, they released FBI reports in which Frank is totally corroborated by Carlos Marcello, overheard at Texarkana Prison. And those FBI reports appear in a book called The Road to Dallas in a paragraph on page 411, just like Frank's number of combat days.
And then days of combat. Isn't that interesting? And Frank had met Jack Ruby a couple of times in the presence of him.
Yeah. Frank would be with Hoffa in Chicago. They would stay at the Edgewater Beach Hotel, and they would have dinner with Sam Giancana, the mafia boss of Chicago, and Jack Ruby would be at that dinner with a stripper that he had brought for Giancana. And Frank told me that Jimmy's son, the current president of Teamsters, James P. Hoffa, was at one or two of those dinners and knows that his father knew Jack Ruby. And then it turns out that another mafia writer by the name of Dan Moldea, a Hoffa writer, he wrote a book called The Hoffa Wars that became the movie that Jack Nicholson played Hoffa in. And Dan Moldea wrote in his book that he had a tape recording of James P. admitting to him that his father knew Jack Ruby. So anyway, that's all in my book.
It's all in your book.
I give credit where I learned it from another source. The yellow
sticker from Amazon, right? Get the yellow sticker because it includes 50 new pages of stuff that wasn't included in the old book. And it's fascinating.
On the break, you asked me about Donnie Brasco, played by Johnny Depp in the movie. Well, Joe Pistone, the real Donnie Brasco, is a dear friend of mine. His emails to me begin Sir Charles, and my emails to him begin Your Honor. And we wrote a book together, a sequel to Donnie Brasco called Donnie Brasco Unfinished Business. And that's also available on Amazon. And Joe introduced me to the singer Al Martino, who played Johnny Fontaine in the Godfather movies, the singer. And and we became friends. And he passed away in 2009, October 2009. But he told me that he got his role in The Godfather against the wishes of the director, Francis Ford Coppola. He got it through his godfather, Russel Bufalino.
Wow.
And that's why he's in the movie. Well, I was speaking at the Sun Valley Writers Conference out here in Idaho, and I told that story. And afterwards, a woman came up to me and identified herself as Wanda Ruddy. She said that her husband, Al Ruddy, was the producer of The Godfather, and that Al and I should talk. She asked me, did you know that Russell had final script approval for The Godfather?
Oh, my gosh.
I know. I said, it's hard for young people today to realize just how powerful the mafia was. You see a TV show like The Sopranos, and they're fighting over nothing. They're fighting over nothing relative to the power they had at one time.
Your wife, she was a little bit scared. And she felt better when Frank was still alive, kind of to protect you. Do you ever feel fear from any of this now, or?
No, not at all. There's another book I co-wrote with Lynn DeVecchio, the supervisor of the Mafia Commission case. And what Lynn did, this was a 1986 case that brought down the heads of the 5 families. That's the nationwide ruling commission. And what Lynn did was he turned the tables on the notion of cut the head off and the tail dies too. He cut the head off the mafia in 1986, working under Rudy Giuliani. And gradually the mafia has disintegrated to the point today where it's nickel-dime stuff. As I mentioned on The Sopranos, it's realistic, but they're fighting over nonsense.
Charles, there's so much to get into this hour, and we're down to our last 3 minutes. So I'm going to hand it to you. Say whatever it is that you want to say. But first, I want to remind people to go to Amazon, buy the book, I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt. And it is, get the one with the yellow sticker that talks about Martin Scorsese in the movie, because that's the one that includes the extra 50-page bonus that just came out. Okay, take it away.
It also includes material that occurred between me and these Hollywood people at our meeting. So that's fun, too. There's a little look at the Hollywood guys from my perspective. The thing that I really want to talk about is that this is a biography. I can't emphasize it enough. This is a full story about a man's life. Frankie, you and I were talking about how strange some lives develop, how they meander around to reach a certain conclusion. When I had my last interview with Frank at Lankenau Hospital, he had some pain in his stomach, and he had to go undergo some testing. They were concerned it might be cancer. It turned out it wasn't. It was a reaction to some of the medicine that he was on, and he was about to be discharged. And I was there with my tape recorder and videotape recorder, I should say. Everything else had been on audio tape. And you can hear him on audio tape on my website, charlesbrandtauthor.com, and go to an NPR interview where you hear Frank Sheeran. But he gave me the last interview where he stood behind the truthfulness of everything he had given me before. He and I said a Hail Mary and an Our Father together, 2 Catholic prayers. Then he took communion from the young priest at the hospital. And then, unbeknownst to me, I mean, we knew he was going to have legal problems as a result of my book. His lawyer, the former DA of Philadelphia, Emmett Fitzpatrick, told him, because of your health, I can keep you out of jail, but you're going to be indicted based on Charlie's book. And
we're running out of time. Oh, my gosh, we're out of time.
He stopped eating and he killed himself.
Yeah, he stopped eating and he killed himself. And that's kind of against a Catholic thing, I would think. But
it's illegal. But
it's illegal. Charlie, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I have to bring it back because there's so much more. You're going to have to come back and visit us again. But thank you so much. Charles Brandt, I Heard You Paint Houses. You heard it here on Frankie Sense and More.
Thank you, Frankie. What fun.
Thank you.
She the one way to turn the world.